The following program discusses sensitive issues related to addictive behavior. Parents are cautioned that some material may be too candid for younger children.
Welcome to Celebrating Life and Recovery. My name is Cheri. I'm your host. Can we survive like adultery and anger and abuse, resentment? This is a continuation from last week, and this journey is incredible. Come join us. Welcome. So we are really looking at all kinds of things this season as far as health-wise, how to maintain our recovery. And I just been blessed. From the very first interview to the very last has just been amazing. But this week we're looking at air. And I'm trying to figure out how to tie in air with the story that you're going to hear, with the life testimony that you're going to hear. And I think God gave me a way. One of the things that I learned when I was traveling is there was a young girl that had emphysema, and she really could not breathe at all. And as I was staying with her at her home, her mother came over, and her mother's just amazing, just an incredible woman of God. And they said that when she was little, her mom was a chain smoker, smoked all the time. The little girl would go to school and people would tease her like, "Do you smoke?" And she'd go like, "No, I don't smoke." But her clothes smelled like smoke. The curtains in her house smelled like smoke. It was like she was always just smelled like smoke. And so all the kids teased her. She finally told her mom when she was 10, "I can't stand that anymore, and you've got to quit smoking." Well, her mom was devastated. "I had no idea you were going through all that." So she quit smoking that very day. It was really, really tough because smoking was harder for me to quit than heroin. I mean, it's a tough addiction. But she quit that very day for her daughter, but it wasn't soon enough. Her daughter is dying in her 30s of emphysema, and she's never smoked at all, but she was surrounded by smoke. So even the air quality in our home, even if I'm not bringing it into my life and I'm surrounded by smokers, I could end up with some lung diseases from that. So it's really important when you're going into recovery. If you're smoking, man, I know it's hard, but you got to quit. You know, I just got to say, I'm not your mama, I'm not your grandma, whatever, but I'm just saying you got to quit because it will take your life. And so think about making sure that even in the house, open windows, you know, don't close things off so much. We have air conditioners and we have all that kind of stuff, but the air quality sometimes in our home are so bad. So open your windows, go outside, take a deep breath, like every hour or so, take a deep breath. It changes how your body reacts. And if you're trying to recover from something, you're going to want all the help you need. But what happens if you can't breathe emotionally? What happens if you're so full of either anger or resentment or bitterness or whatever, and you can't breathe? And I hate to say that's where I'm going to introduce my next guest, but I'm going to introduce my next guest. Ralph, the first time I heard your story, I thought that you really are brave coming out and saying, this is my issue, this is what I'm dealing with. But we're talking about air, taking a breath emotionally, all those kind of things. So I want to turn it over to you, but I want you to start from the very beginning. Who are you? What kinds of things did you grow up with? And then, you know what the issue is, and go into the issue.
Okay. I'll try to keep the two things separate. I would say I had, by my way of seeing things, probably a pretty normal life. I had a mom and a dad that stuck together through their whole lives. They're still together. My dad, I was raised in a Christian home. Both mom and dad were Christians before I was born. My his family was converted to Christianity when he was a little boy, and my mom is a multi-generation Christian.
So it sounds perfect.
Yeah, I mean, it's in a lot of ways and that's, you know, begins to cross over almost immediately, because that was the goal, was to make everything look perfect. And there was all kinds of little games that were played to make sure that when we stepped outside the front door, we had a vocabulary, we had a way of saying things and doing things that made us look like nothing was wrong.
Ever.
Right.
Was that the truth?
No, I mean, I think probably all families, by now I think I realize all families have certain kinds and levels of dysfunction. and my family had its kind and level of dysfunction.
Okay. And so but you learned early on that, you know what, whatever's happening inside, that's one thing. When you step out the door, you better look like this, or you need to look like this.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a family is a sacred thing. It's a sacred institution. That's what I think. That's what I believe. But there gets to be such a game played with that sacredness that the things that are reserved for the family, I think, and that are meant to be personal and somewhat private in the family, are meant to be uplifting. So that when I walk out the proverbial front door, what's shining out of me is real.
Right.
It's not pasted on. Right. It's joy. In my family, I think the sensation was that we were always covering something up, and so I think that had probably a lot to do, even now when I think back on what was my perception of growing up. And I had my family totally psychoanalyzed by the time I was about 15, 18 years old. I had everything figured out. I had my dad figured out. I had my mom figured out. I figured out what was wrong. When I got to college, a lot of what I had figured out I had affirmed in Psych 101.
I took Psych 101. So you look at every page and say, oh, that is so me. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and
that is us.
Things just kind of clicked, and I went, okay, so I wasn't just young and naive. Really, some of the things I figured out, at least in terms of mechanics of the human psyche and things that go good and bad, wasn't too far off.
Yeah.
And along with that went, I wouldn't say vows, but I made promises that the things I identified as being just plain negative, obviously bad in the family, whether they were being covered up or not, I was never going to do those things.
Mm-hmm. I'm not going to be that. I'm not going to have that. That's not going to be part of my family.
I'm never going to be like that.
Yeah. Those are incredible. You know, to me, I don't think we realize, and you probably, even the way you said that, have some awareness, but I don't think we realize that. I think the enemy himself steps in at that moment. We make those kind of covenant or vows or promises that, you know, I'm not going to ever have that, and Satan just says, yeah, you better make sure. You're going to make sure. And so we can't, it's like those are such horrendous things to say to ourselves, that nobody's going to hurt me like that, nobody's going to.
Yeah, and the worst part is nobody's going to hurt me, but I'm not going to hurt people like I see that happening to other people in the family.
Yeah, I'm not going to be like that.
I'm not going to do that from more of the perpetrator standpoint.
Yeah.
And then things don't go that way. And I think I like what you said, because that's exactly. It's been a horrific and tough growing up experience spiritually to realize all of this. I'm never going to be like that. I'm never going to do that. I even had functioning paradigms by the time I was, I'm not kidding, 13, 14 years old, where, okay, I'm now projecting myself into adulthood, and I have a family, and I come home from work, and it's been a bad day at work. This is what I'm not going to do. You know what I mean? And I had all these things worked out.
So Ralph, for somebody to do that at such an early age, you must have seen stuff that was pretty intense, that you said, you know, man.
Well, I mean, how intense does it have to be when a child, and you know, we were talking a little bit earlier about this, some of this stuff is relative. What's shocking to me may be less shocking to somebody else, but it's all evil. It's all bad. When you see your mother and father go at each other, even just verbally, this can be traumatizing. I would say probably, and in fact, honestly, I just dealt with this, I would say 2 years ago with my father. There was one fateful night, probably I'm going to say 12, and I've run this through my little brothers. I worked with them, I should say my younger brothers, because they're bigger and smarter than I am, so that's what goes around comes around, because I used to pick on them a lot. But I don't know, I was probably no more than 12 years old, I'll say that for sure. So my second youngest brother, and then my youngest brother was still in diapers. He still slept in a crib. And one night my parents got into it, and they yelled and screamed at each other all night long. Well, to kind of get back to the point, nobody shot anybody else. That would be I don't know what that would be. I can't imagine that would be bad. You hear that. That's what happens in other people's houses. That's what we tell ourselves. But when you hear things being thrown around and they're screaming, and sometimes you could even hear the hitting. You could hear the, what the body sound has an interesting sound when it gets socked. And
right.
When you hear that all night long, it changes you.
It changes you.
And that was a traumatizing point in my life that I had always, I knew it was traumatizing, but I just never really, if I can put it this way, gave it enough credit. Because here I am, however old I am now, and I'm thinking, I've taken care of a lot of the stuff with my parents, what I call my Freudian stuff. I've taken care of with my parents, both my mom and dad individually. I've confronted them with their own issues. I've tried to cop to, the trouble I was to them growing up and so on and so forth as best as I can. And then there's this one night, and it just kind of keeps floating around in my head, and I kind of keep pushing it away. And for me, I think it was the turning point, or a turning point in my life that was very psychologically damaging and spiritually damaging. I don't know what the difference is. To me,
right.
Psychology and spirituality are like this. I have
it's just who we are.
Yeah. And I think that changed me a lot more than I ever gave it credit for. And really the Holy Spirit worked, and I knew what that felt like, because when I graduated from college, I went through this with my dad. The Holy Spirit really called me to a relationship for the first time ever with my father. I would never, ever have a real relationship with my father. It was just too emotionally risky.
Because you wanted to protect yourself against
Absolutely.
him, right?
Yeah.
And
emotionally, especially.
Emotionally.
Yeah.
It's like I couldn't trust him. I know that you could be safe at one point, but you're not safe at another point, so it's easier just to distance myself.
Anything that guy got, he would take and use it as a weapon against you sooner or later. When I got out of college, the Holy Spirit, was in the process of growing as I probably am now, but I was at a point, and the Holy Spirit really called me, among other things, reconcile with your father, start a relationship. It was an interesting calling. It wasn't just reconciliation, it was, you may now have a relationship with your father. I'm here, I'll protect you.
Wow.
It was a horrific experience, honestly,
right.
But it was fast, and it launched a relationship. My dad could never, he wanted that, but he could never bring himself to initiate that, which is really sad. But with the other garbage that goes in the house, it's not surprising in retrospect that the patriarch of the family couldn't start the deep relationship that he really desired to have, with his sons. And
so what did you do to reconcile with him? Did you say something? Did you go and say, let's talk, let's...
Well, as with good traditional family issues, it started out with some trivial thing. I think we were moving stuff around, and it got to be a little bit of a verbal argument about, well, I should move it this way or put it in this particular position, whatever it was. And it ended up in a pretty severe verbal battle. And of course, every time my dad and I got into it, all this, I want to use the C word, all this junk,
yeah.
It would come like a volcano.
Right.
I mean, it could be, I don't like that glass of water on the table over there, and give it 15, 20 minutes and it would turn into a mess
yeah.
that had all this garbage in it from the past, because it was all never dealt with at all, not even close.
You know what, when somebody says that, and I heard a psychologist talk about, that we all have almost a file cabinet within our hearts or within our soul, and every time we get offended or every time we get angry, every time we have something unresolved, we just put the file in the right place and file it in that cabinet. Then something happens and every single paper flies out. So it's like, what happened? Because it was just about the glass, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Well, no, it was years and years of stuff. And you said in your home that happened a lot.
Yeah.
This particular day it happened.
Yes, it happened, and I did something I swore I would never do, and that was I went back home and lived for 3 months, so I would never live at home. I love my mom and dad dearly.
But as an adult, to hear that kind of abuse, it's hard.
Yeah. So my dad and I got into it, and it turned into, I think I really had a nervous breakdown, because at some point after 30 or 45 minutes of just circling stuff around, and he won't let stuff go, and I bear my streak of stubbornness well.
Right.
I just lost it, and I started screaming at my dad. And I screamed at my dad, as I recall, nonstop. I mean, I was even still moving around the house and helping them move from their apartment where they'd been living into the house that they had just recently got. And I'm screaming as loud as I can scream, which is, you know, I'm kind of a mumbly talker, but I'm screaming at the top of my lungs, and just all kinds of stuff is coming out, including some good stuff. I mean, some stuff that makes sense.
Right.
But I'm just yelling at him, screaming at him at the top of my lungs. We'd drive us 20 minutes into Silver Spring, and then it was back again and back and forth, and I'm screaming at him, I'd say for a couple, 3 hours nonstop. I think
you could not stop.
I lost it. Now, my brother was there, and we came into the house, and I was still gone, I think, pretty much. And I actually, maybe the only time, but for sure only one of 2 times, when I actually thought about taking my life. And it wasn't, oh, I'm so sad, and it wasn't anything like that. I was just freaking mad. Right.
I wanted to kill somebody, and I can't kill you. So
somebody's got to die, and I killed 2 birds with 1 stone. I get to kill somebody, and you have to pay for it by surviving it. Yeah. And they live on a high-rise apartment complex, and they're way at the top. And I'm looking at the sliding door, and
I'm just going to dive off.
And I'm taking my fist, and on the wall behind me, there's this temperature thermostat. And I'm just hammering this thermostat with the back of my fist, just like this, over and over again, screaming at my dad, who is sitting over in that direction. And my brother, my second to the youngest brother, is standing, or kind of kneeling next to my dad. And all I remember in that is my brother's kind of talking softly to my father. And I heard him at one point say, "Look at him." This is my brother telling my dad to look at me. "He needs you." Oh. And so it's hard not to get choked up about stuff like that. But
it's hard for me not to get choked up, and I wasn't even there.
You know, it's just, and at that moment, I just began, and it was a long time coming down from that, and even longer getting my voice back, because by then I think I was just whispering, even though I was still screaming at the top of my lungs. And it was, I think, hearing my younger brother say that it did something spiritually in the room, because literally the color of the room changed at that point, and things began to take a turn. So to answer your question, that was the turning point. That was the day, and it was literally a whip around. And remember, I went into it on faith and faith alone. I was sure I wasn't going to change my dad. I'm still sure of that. But I knew I could, because my dad does strive to love God in the best way he possibly can, and who knows what brain damage, you know, he has, that he's carried with him from his childhood as well.
But that's a really big truth.
Oh, it's so true. It's just so.
We walk away generation after generation after generation until somebody says, you know what, it stops here. It cannot continue from here.
Right. That's right. And I guess, you know, in my family, I was called to be that stopping point. And
So let me just say, with your dad, that you had that moment, totally a meltdown, totally losing control. God getting both your attention with that statement is He needs you. So a little bit of change starts to happen, seeps in that relationship. And what about your mom? Because the whole time she's probably trying to fix something.
When my dad and I used to get into it like that, or anything even close to that, Mom would hang around for a bit, but she kind of had some sort of symptom that she would look for, some sort of gauge where it would go, and she would say, "If you guys don't cool it, I'm calling the cops," and then she would remove herself from the area. And I think that kind of happened in this case, because it was pretty much just my dad and I spending the day. I think everybody in my family realized something like this was somewhat inevitable, knowing my dad and knowing me. Unfortunately, I think it was going to have to happen. I don't really advocate, I'm not saying this is a template that anybody should follow. It was a horrible experience, I mean, really.
When you talk about
it did open the door. You know, and this was the important thing. It opened a door to a relationship with my dad. And why was that important? Well, other than hopefully the obvious, really I felt that the Holy Spirit had called me at that, and this wasn't like a long calling. It was after I got out of college, and I'm wondering, okay, I've got a degree, now what? You know, I was in that frame of mind, and really, it just dawned on me, you need to begin a relationship with your father. And I certainly, on my own, I would have continued to go through my whole life, even loving God and everything sincerely, protecting myself emotionally from my father.
And you know, because we work with at-risk people all over the world, there's so many people that are going to hear this and get it. You know, that do I reconcile with this craziness? With, you know, I don't even know how to change it, and the other person I'm looking at has no clue that they're as damaged as they are. And you're asking me to move back into the relationship. How do we do that? But in faith, what you're saying is that crisis started that for you, started that journey for you.
Yes. Yes, all of it.
And don't you wish you could say, and the next day, Dad was so different? You know, we wish you could say that, but that's not what happens, is the next day, you were a little different.
The next day, when I could talk again, later in that evening, my dad was down in his study, and I walked down, and I put my hand on my dad's shoulder, and I looked at him, and I said, Dad, let's just bury the hatchet. And my dad stood up and bawled on my shoulder for about 5 minutes. And he said, this is what he said, if I can say it without bawling myself, because I wasn't bawling then. I mean, my heart was pretty steely after all that.
Right.
But I realized I was being led ultimately, thank God, by God. And I just said, let's bury the hatchet. And he stood up and he said, you truly are a man of God. That's what he said. And I thought, well, that's providential right there.
Yeah.
So,
amen.
Because, well,
So with that, and you said your mom tended to kind of just wait until, you know, whatever, and I'll call the police if it doesn't calm down. But where did she ever start to say, you know, let's get healthy, let's kind of heal, let's talk about this, let's do whatever? Because I get a kind of a picture of your dad, and even of his childhood, I get somewhat of a picture, but your mom, I don't get any sense of who she was.
that's interesting. My mom, I think, is and was an enabler to my father's stuff.
Yeah. So explain to people that have no idea what enabling means. What does that mean?
Well, to me it means that rather than do what you just described, rather than take one person or the other or call in outside help, not only to save the moment, but also to fix the problem, because my mom loves her family, her children, and she wants things to work out. She doesn't do that. Her first duty is to protect her husband. This is my perception of my mother. And in doing that, when there's bad stuff going on, when you protect somebody in their wrongdoing, you're enabling.
Mm-hmm. And nothing changes.
And nothing changes, and it usually gets worse over time.
A lot of times with enabling, just being able to say, okay, come on, stop, let's go eat, it's time to eat. And the table is set perfectly and everybody sits. And we just had this incredible storm that just went through, and nobody talks about the storm. You know, they talk about the elephant in the living room, nobody talks about the elephant, nobody talks about the anger. And yet everybody now is dressed properly, is saying grace.
Yeah.
The day goes on. We're going to go ahead and take a break, because to me, the most important thing about any of this, the most important thing about realizing where we've come from and where we kind of get our anger and our junk from, is that what do we do with it next? What does that look like next, especially in Ralph's life? And stay with us, because man, it's not an easy journey to know that in your toolkit, I have this in my toolkit. I don't have a lot of things to pull from, and God has to teach me. And so, man, we're going to explore that when you come back.
The following program discusses sensitive issues related to addictive behavior. Parents are cautioned that some material may be too candid for younger children.
Welcome back. You know, when Ralph was talking about just even the pattern with his dad is that it felt like a volcano. And a lot of times in domestic violence, regardless of the severity, some people say that you have to have broken arms and hospital runs to have violence interfere with a family. You do not. Man, verbal abuse is as intense, and definitely when you have that underlying anger. But it is like a volcano that is just, you know the tension's there, you know it can erupt anytime, and when it does, you have that anger, you have that explosion. So first you have the agitation, then you have the explosion, then you have apologies, then everybody tries to make it right again, and the guilt and the shame, and then that agitation builds up, and it's just that constant cycle. And you saw that as a kid. You intervened, not intervened, but kind of God just put a little bit of a kind of a truce with you and your dad, so open up that relationship, and you both really are dying for that.
Yes.
Your dad not knowing how to get it, and you even making a vow at one point that I'm not going to open myself up to him, realizing that you're going to have to do that somewhat.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to have a relationship with somebody you live with, you're going to have to either not be there or shut yourself down, which is as good as leaving in some extreme cases, or you're going to have to become vulnerable. I'm so thankful that there is a God, A, and B, that he's a personal God, because without him, I have no doubt this dysfunction never would have been solvable.
So with that situation with your dad and the fact that you intervened with him, or that God intervened with the two of you, so did it ever affect you and any relationships you had apart from mom and dad?
Yeah, did I mention before that I had, not only had I said I will never do that in a kind of a general way, but that I had very specifically outlined how my life would go?
Yeah, you even acted it out.
Okay.
You know, to me, when you said that, when you said that, I thought, you know what, you didn't have the stories where people had arms broken or in the hospital, but for a kid to act out, I'm going to actually practice not doing that because I don't want to be that.
Right.
That showed me the level of abuse. Was pretty intense.
Yeah, and ultimately the effect it had on me was intense. And not to go too far backwards here, as I tried to work this out with my brothers as recently as 3 years ago, before I confronted my dad on this, they were, you know, the youngest brother was in diapers. I mean, he may or not have remembered. My second to the youngest brother says he has vague memories, but he never realized really how intense it was. So I don't know how much of blocking there was in this with them, and how much was just age-related, where they just don't remember.
They were
and
too
they
young.
were doing their own things.
What a lot of people say, especially for men, is they intellectually lock off, close their heart down solid, that you are not going to get to me, but then I don't know how to let you get to me, and I don't know how to feel truly joy, laughter, love, any of that kind of stuff, because I'm locked down and have been early in that intellectually locked heart. I can go in my head, but I can't go in my heart or my feelings.
Which is exactly spells out the way I dealt with my dad from the time I was 1 till I got out of college. Just lockdown. And you know, I talked to him, and he, you know, told me what he wanted me to do, mow the lawn, and I would obey. But I mean, we had no relationship whatsoever. Well, you know, I don't want to say vow, because for me that's a big word, and that has God implied in it. But I promised myself I was just never going to act like that. And I don't care, and I imagined all the worst things, you know, that a 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old can imagine. But there's some pretty terrible things, actually, as it turns out. If that happens, then this is how I'll handle it. But whatever happens, I will never bring that home and take out. I will always take it out on the people who are doing it to me or whatever.
Right. Not my family.
Not my family.
Not my wife.
And then I turned right around and got married, and about 3 years into the marriage, I found myself doing exactly the same thing that my dad was doing. And I'm not so sure it was the same exact pattern, but then again, does it really matter? Dad was bringing it home from work. I'm not sure where it was coming from with me. I think it was actually frustration with a growing relationship. You know, probably some very normal stuff going on there. A new husband and a new wife, getting to know each other in all the real ways.
Right. But you know, we talked about earlier about that, but we don't have a toolkit. I don't have anything in my toolkit. So, you know, I'm establishing this new family, but all I know is what I know.
Yeah, and you know, as I look back, I didn't realize I was doing this, but I actually did kind of reach out to help for help to some family members. One was my brother, which I don't think was crazy, but one was my dad.
Even when you
What
said
do you
that, I
do with
thought
that?
you're kidding me.
Yeah.
You know, but you know what? Who do we reach out to? Who do I say? You know what? I'm in trouble, I think.
Yeah, I'm in trouble, and I could feel the anger welling up. And this was before I ever raised a hand to my wife. And I could feel it welling up, and I just didn't know. I had, like you said, I had no tools. I call it vocabulary. I had no vocabulary to deal with this at all. And I could feel this thing happening to me, and it was so powerful and so inbred in me that I just was clueless. I wasn't even naive. Becoming the evil monster I was going to soon become was naive to the whole thing. I really needed to reach out to an objective third party really badly, right then and there. Even if it was the pastor, I needed to shed all shame on it, and right then and there just go say, I got this thing, I think I'm going to do something bad, and I don't want to do this.
And I need some help.
We need some help. I need help, and then we need help.
But instead, you decided to handle it.
I really was left on my own. So, and I don't want to make it sound like it was everybody else's fault.
Right.
Look, I'm the one who ended up doing it. So, but in the end, I ended up, pushing my wife. I never, punched her, kicked her, threw her on the ground and kicked her. But listen, when
pushing, yelling, verbal abuse.
Yes.
Okay.
And when you, real bad. And when you run at somebody at full speed like a linebacker, even though I'm not built like one still, there's a lot of inertia there. And there was 3 or 4 times when I ran at her full speed, I was just so angry, and I shoved her. And you've pushed somebody hard when they come off of their feet, fly across half of a room and hit the wall.
Right.
They're bruised. They're messed up just as surely as if I had taken my fist and hit them. There's no difference, maybe worse.
Exactly.
I remember one time that we were into it, and my wife at the time, she's no longer my wife at the time wasn't my mom. She was not an enabler per se, or maybe she was, but not in the same way my mom
She was going to stand up to you.
Yeah, she wasn't going to take any old thing that comes from me or anybody else. Which in the long run I think was a good thing. But at the moment, in those moments, it was fuel to a fire. One time I ran into the bathroom doing this thing and pushed her so hard, she was standing in front of the sink, that she flew across the bathroom and into the tub. I think that was probably the 2nd or 3rd time that happened. And immediately after she landed in the tub, the way that she landed, she was all contorted. And I stopped and I looked at her, and for the first time I became aware of just how lucky I would be if she hadn't broken her neck.
Exactly. I could have broken her neck right now.
Easily could have broken, more easy than if I was pummeling her with my closed fist. I could have hurt her way worse doing that. And that probably was the beginning of some kind of sobriety on this for me, just the beginning of it.
Do you know, and what's really interesting, and I've got to just say this, because up until that point, for most people in those situations, most people in domestic violence, especially the perpetrator, is it feels like, why do you keep pushing me like that? Why do you keep making me do this? And talk about that, because that's very real. It's like, I wouldn't do this if you wouldn't do this, if you didn't.
Yeah, again, I had, and I apologize if I come across as a know-it-all in this, but really, by the time I was 15, I had all these issues psychologically analyzed. That wasn't a language, I think I was thinking that, and that was my excuse after the fact, because after these things happened, I literally physically felt ill.
You'd be sick.
I mean sick, physically sick to my stomach. And, some of that was probably normal from the fight or flight mechanism that goes on, but I think it was also a moral issue, and it was disgusting. That would be the word.
Yeah.
And it was disgusting
and
to
I can't
me,
believe I'm everything that I said I wasn't going to be.
There was something right there that kind of came up. Wish I could remember what it was. Maybe it'll come back to me. But yeah.
So she's laying in the tub. You're seeing that. Realize the intensity of that. And I just want to ask, is there children involved yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
Now, after my one and only and precious daughter was born, I think, and I could be corrected on this and I'll happily accept it, but I think that the physical violence was subsiding or over, but the verbal damage was still going on.
Right. So your child grew up
And
in the
the
same.
verbal damage was going on, and I was still physically violent because I'm picking stuff up, and I mean, it's phone. How many phones do you go through in 6 months before you realize there's a problem?
Yeah.
So yet another phone flies against the wall, and my little daughter, still in diapers, she's probably 2, comes in and she sticks her hands on her hips and she goes, "Dad, what's going on?" You know what I mean? And and my wife and I had had a terrible verbal fight, and she had gone out. And in response to all that, I had the phone in my hand, and I chucked it against the wall, and there went another phone. And that's, you know, when she had that response.
I remember at 3, so sad that I couldn't save my mom. I thought she was going to be killed. And at 3 years old, wanting to know how I could stop them from killing each other. And it is a horrible thing as a child to just say, I have no power to stop these adults from literally killing each other.
Yeah. This was the hugest fear between, with my mother and father.
Yeah.
I lived this nightmare to be, which was, when was somebody going to really, really hurt the other person physically?
And now it's in your own home, and that's how you're living.
Yeah.
So how do you, where does any kind of sanity come in? Because right now you're doing the same thing. When you come out the door, you guys all look good. Because even the people you work with, and I've heard someone say, I had no idea, and they always look so normal.
Yeah.
Because you did the same thing that your folks did.
Yep, I would say so.
Same thing that every home that is dealing with domestic violence tends to do. At every level. I've seen people that have everything, that have all of the riches, all of the stuff, all of the toys, and then I have seen people in poverty, and they all try to do the same thing. When they walk out the door, let's look normal.
I had a job for a while where I went door to door fixing people's exercise gear, and I could go into homes and I could feel that there was domestic violence going on in that home.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an aura, and usually it's more than just, you know, wife gets once in her whole life upset with the husband and slaps him. We're talking pattern domestic violence.
Exactly.
There's
There's something in the air.
Yeah. And the reason I could feel it was because I grew up with it, and I lived it, and I became a perpetrator and did my part to perpetuate that social evil.
Absolutely.
And so
now, where does help come?
Help comes finally when
For you, where did it come?
when Kathy and Emily left, and
They said, we're done.
yeah.
To save ourselves, to redeem anything as far as our lives, we have to take off.
Yeah, Kathy was not going to put up, again, she was not my mom. I think she was more my dad, if you want to do the psychoanalysis thing. I think I married my dad, but she was not an enabler.
That's a whole nother show though, Ralph.
It's a whole nother show, but it also locks into what we're talking about, I think, a little too.
So personality-wise?
Personality-wise, yeah, she was very contentious, which in this case worked out for everybody, especially for her to begin with. She worked with my brother and sister-in-law to, I got to get out of here, what am I going to do?
I need a safe place.
My brother's a physician, so he deals with this stuff sadly frequently, so he had a mechanism. They found a shelter, a women's shelter for them to go to in another state, and they went. It took me, cutting to the chase a little bit, 2 weeks to admit what was going on. So I come back from a bicycle race on a Sunday afternoon and nobody's home. I'm kind of thinking, well, that's not highly unusual. They often, on a warm summer day, go off and do whatever they want to do. Evening comes, it's 9, 10, 11, 12, nobody comes home.
No calls?
I'm thinking, should I call my in-laws and see if she's over there across town? And so I just let it rest. By 3 o'clock in the morning, I wake up in the middle of the night, and they're never gone all night, at least not without me knowing where they're at.
Right.
And so I'm deep in my heart, I know what's going on, but I'm denying it even to myself. And a whole nother day goes by, I go to work, a whole nother day goes by, and I get a call from my dad. My dad confronts me on this issue.
Isn't there some irony in that?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just saying.
I think there's a great irony in it, from ways that we probably won't have time to even get to here.
Yeah.
Later that evening, my Uncle Ralph calls me, my dad's oldest brother, and he doesn't confront me, but he never calls me. Not that we don't like each other, but he just doesn't call me now that I'm an adult. For some reason, I'm no fun anymore or something. And he just asked me how I'm doing. And I'm saying, okay, lying to him and to myself, and crossing my fingers that somehow what's happening isn't happening. The next day, my brother, my physician brother, he and his wife have assisted Kathy and Emily to escape their circumstances. And he calls me up, and he hangs on the phone, saying nothing, and other than, "This is Dan, how are you doing?" He's waiting for me, to cop to this stuff. And so we beat around this bush for a few minutes, and he just tells me at one point, he says, "Look, Ralph, I deal with this all the time. Every week I deal with this." And he says, "Legally, I am obligated to report this stuff every time it happens." And so when he says that, reality really begins to wash in. Right. And I realize this isn't a mind game. This is way bigger than, oh, gee, what are people in the church going to think about it? And this is way bigger than all that. I'm not there yet, but it's seeping in. This is a big deal. And it's a big deal, and it's not that I didn't realize it was a big deal, but it's bigger than the deals I had that were bigger than it, and that's how other people perceive me, my reputation, and all that
stuff. And what's really interesting, and when you're living in that day in and day out, that is your norm, so it begins to look like it's okay. Right. Not okay, really, but it doesn't feel life-threatening. It doesn't feel so abnormal. And then what your brother said is, you're like, this was wrong.
Yeah, and so he just laid it right smack on the line. I think even my mother called me at one point. But I think, so it takes the better part of a half a week or almost a full week for me to finally get to the point where I'm telling myself, this is what's happened. And it takes a day for me to really assimilate that and move on to, now what? Mm-hmm. If anything, now what? Are they gone forever? And so now that the cat's out of the bag,
because with the perpetrator, and what's really interesting in my own life, because I've been involved in situations where there was domestic violence, is that you want to just say honestly from your heart, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. So that first reaction comes up is like, I will change this time, I will get some help, I will do all that kind of stuff, but in your gut you know that maybe this is too late.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be able to redeem this.
That's right. And that, again, took another couple of days. Kathy and Emily were probably gone at least a month. And it took me another few days to get to the point where I was moving past the feelings of, oh, gee, I'll just do this apology or something. I still wasn't really aware of the consequences of these actions, because I'd never seen the consequences of the actions before.
Right, and your mom stayed. She never left, she never took off. So, for you to have a woman that says, you know what, I'm done, I really am done.
Right.
I may love you, but I have to take my child and leave.
Right. So it takes another few days to get to the point where now, since I can't figure out what do we do from here, I call my brother back and I say, so what do we do from here? And he said, I'm not sure. He goes, what do you want? It took me another day or two to process that. Mm-hmm. I love my family. I was wired to be a family guy, and really the realization that my family could be taken away from me in an instant, and then to realize I'm the one who did that, mm-hmm. was huge. I mean, it helped me to understand in a way I never could, I don't think otherwise, probably unfortunately, that how valuable that was to me. And it took me several days to really evaluate just how valuable is this.
Incredible.
What does this really mean to me?
We usually break for questions, and I'm going to keep it here for a minute because I just want to, everything that you said, I will never do, I will never be. Now you're sitting there in the quiet of your house by yourself saying, I'm all that. Where do you go for help? I mean, how do you find the hand of God again? How do you get into a safe place yourself?
realizing at that time that the chances of my of my wife and my daughter never being married to me again, realizing that I could easily now take that as a foregone conclusion, that I would be lucky if I was even able to communicate with them again.
Because they could get restraining orders.
The whole thing.
They could make sure that you never see them again.
That's right. And they had all the validity, they had evidence, they had everything. But since anger had been a part of my life since early childhood, even in school, I got busted a few times because I would just blow up. I would punch guys that were twice my size. And sometimes they would punch back, and that wasn't pretty either. But just the fact that just my anger would get so out of control so fast was something I had struggled with my whole life. So it was another stepping stone. And anger has been, I can go back in another program and show you literally like a ladder. This has been a lifetime of growth. A very miserable one in this regard, but at least there's growth. And I began to look around. I began to wonder, do I go to a psychologist? Do I go to a therapist? Well, I stumbled into a place called Antlers in the city where we were living. And they had a 12-step program there. They mostly dealt with alcoholics, but they also took in people who were convicted domestic violence perpetrators.
Wow.
And I went and I joined that group. And that's how I began to tangibly take care of, specifically, with no bars hold, my anger issue.
So you know what, I wish we had 2 programs to cover this, but we don't. So in the time that we have left, which is only like 8 minutes or so, what did you learn in that group? What was life changing for you? Because you're changing the very core of who you are from the time you were little and confronting what you became and then coming out of that. How did that happen?
It was not therapy, it wasn't psychotherapy, it was, you don't get to hit people when you're mad or you're going to jail. It was that kind of therapy.
Like, okay, yeah. Can I write that down?
Yeah. In my group, I was the only one that was there voluntarily. And I got there, and I don't know what I thought. You know, I admit I'm somewhat naive in the world, especially some of the programs I listened to of yours. I realize in some ways I've had it lucky, but sadly some of the people I've been responsible for don't have it so lucky. And in that group, we used a technique called rational emotive therapy. Now, it's been a long time since I've gone through it strictly, but the bottom line is, it's training. It's children should have this figured out. Now, Johnny, when you get mad, you don't punch people, you know what I mean? Yeah. Most people get this figured out sooner. This is what we learn to do. We learn. So you know, you brought up earlier the idea that I'm asking myself, this violence happens, and I wish she would stop making me mad. And in rational emotive therapy, we learn specifically that we're the ones that decide how we're going to react. Nobody makes me mad. Amen. Nobody makes me happy.
Right, and so that's one of the first things. And what I wanted to say before we go there, because I really love that approach to especially domestic violence, but if you want to go just on a biblical sense, what they say is take every thought captive. And so it's the same kind of thing, is what are you thinking? What are your lies? What are your errors? What moves you? And so with somebody that strikes out violently, is like, if they didn't do that, I wouldn't be mad, and what they're doing is making me mad. So the first lie is that nobody can make you mad.
That's right.
What are some other lies that they were teaching you in that group?
Well, that was the biggest and most important one, because it was interesting. Every time the facilitator would throw that out, everybody was coming back with it, and she's spelling it out for us. You know, nobody makes you feel this way, and they're going, well, for me, it's when she or he does this or that or the other thing. That just makes me mad. You know what I mean? And we go through weeks. You know, I went through 4 months of this, you know, 4 days a week. And we're 3 months into this, and these same individuals are going, it just makes me mad. It makes me mad. That mantra, she makes me mad. That little child makes me mad when mom was in there for hurting her baby. When my baby does this, it makes me mad. And you're looking at that person, you're kind of going, they actually believe that.
Right.
And I'm thinking, I actually believe that.
Right. And being able to, what's the most incredible moment for God to do for any of us is to say that is not true.
It's not true.
You can, you can respond in a different way. You can take a breath and respond in a different way. You can count to 10. You can walk out and come back. But to actually get mad and physically throw something or hit someone, you can't do. It's not okay.
It's not okay. And here's the wonderful thing about doing things God's way is it's freeing.
In what sense?
That I'm not driven. Nobody dictates to me how I'm going to feel. I get to choose that.
Amen. So they are out of your life now. And I know that's created in some sadness for you, some heartbreak for you. But how are you different now?
Well, I want to share this because I think so far, and I'm going to continue to learn my lesson from all of this, but so far, I mean, we were married for another 15 years after that. And one thing I want to say is I asked her several times over the next several years after we reconciled and got back together. She wouldn't even think about coming until I had finished this program and the paper was in the hand. And we went and mutually visited the facilitator who was a trained psychotherapist. It wasn't easy getting my wife and daughter back. It was not easy at all. At any moment it could have changed just because she felt like it, and she had every right to do that. But 15 years after that, then the marriage dissolves. And this is what I want to say. I don't think that, and I could be kidding myself here, but I don't think that she left primarily because of us. Our relationship was a little distant, but there wasn't anything real, in my estimation, really bad about it. But there wasn't anything really good about it either. It was just kind of there, and I was traveling a lot.
Yeah.
But you know what? I think, and the more I think about it, the more I believe that we could still be together if I had laid a foundation that she could have gone through all the stuff she was going through when she left, and felt there was one safe place, and that place was her home and her husband.
And so what you're saying is that the damage that was done in your relationship, it never felt like a safe place for her. There was already
no doubt. Yeah, no doubt. And I believe that she forgave me. You know, I really believe it. And when she forgave me, I then asked forgiveness from God. So all the forgiveness is done, but so is the damage. And that damage, I mean, it's no less than I build a high-rise building and I forget to take care of one little corner over there, and it's exposed to a little more water. The building may still last 20 or 30 years, but it was meant to last 100 years.
Right.
But that one tiny little piece of the foundation erodes, and it erodes, and it erodes, without anybody getting there with a hammer and really knocking it around. It just, the foundation begins to come loose. And even with all people doing the best that they could, my wife, me, doing the best that we could with the pressures life puts up on us and the challenges of being married, still there was no foundation. I corroded the foundation when I brought violence into the home. That's what I want to make clear. I corroded that marriage relationship permanently by bringing violence into the home.
You know, we are going to go out on a break and come back for the close. And I would like you to come back and kind of talk to the guy out there that says, you know what, I think she's making me mad. They're making me mad. And talk to him, because it is every day that you bring damage into the home, you may not go back to fix it. You may not be able to go back to fix it, even in your healing. Even in the fact that you know that there is a God that forgives you and loves you. And Ralph, I know that about you. You know, you want to stand up as a man of God and you want to really do the right thing, but you can't fix this. There was too much that happened. We'll be right back. If you're in that situation now, I'm going to kind of tell, especially the women, a few things about keeping themselves safe. And if it's a woman that's the abuser, I'm going to tell the guys. And then I'm going to have Ralph just give you some advice, maybe. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
The following program discusses sensitive issues related to addictive behavior. Parents are cautioned that some material may be too candid for younger children.
Welcome back. I just want to say, before I turn it over to Ralph and ask him a few more things, I want to say, if you are in a situation where you are being hurt in any way, we're going to have some numbers up on the credits. Please look for them, call someone, get some help. I remember when I first met my husband, we were first married, we were arguing about something, and he picked up a paper towel and he threw it at me. I packed my bags and was calling the police, and I said, you have no right to throw anything at me. And the reason that was is I was in domestic violence prior to that. I knew that slippery slope, and I thought, it's a paper towel today, but it may be something more tomorrow. So have those boundaries. And you know what I'm talking about, Ralph, as far as that. But I want you to talk to, if there's somebody out there that is stuck right now, what would you say to him, her?
Well, the first thing I would ask you is, you have a family. Do you care about them? And if you care about them, if you love them as you say you do, or at least you tell yourself that, how much? Those are really questions. That's the beginning of everything else that's going to happen next. If you're a perpetrator of domestic violence in any regard, and that includes just yelling and screaming, I would say, if you value your family, that you stop your whole life, you get leave from work, and you go to your pastor, if you have that resource, you look up a psychologist in the phone book, you treat this like life and death, because you are destroying your family. You have been, and if you go one moment longer from this moment that I'm speaking to you now, you're perpetuating major spiritual damage at least, and you'll never recover from it. It's damage that cannot be unbroken.
And I love what you're saying is get help now. Because you know that what's really amazing to me is God wants to bring healing, not only to somebody that is a victim of domestic violence, a victim of abuse, but he wants to bring healing to the person that is perpetrating, because that person was damaged somewhere too, and God is saying, you know what, I want to bring everybody in the room to a place of recovery. I want families to be restored. I want people to be redeemed. I want someone to walk out the door and actually feel joy and not have to pretend. I want you to sit at the table and laugh with each other and have it be real. And we can't do that if we let all this stuff in our pockets, all this anger and bitterness grow. And there is help out there. There's definitely help from God, but there's help from each other. There's help in your churches, and there's help in your community, so call someone. Until next week, always remember that God is crazy about you. Me too. Don't do this alone. Don't let it continue another minute. Get help, and man, just praise God.